Well, hey guys, welcome back to the show. This is Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective. Well, I have a story about John Gotti and how he made his bones with the murder of Jimmy McBratney and that whole backstory behind that. It seems like with most mob stuff, there's two or three different stories about it. We just have to go with people's memories, but yet mob guys will throw out different stories and, in order to maybe throw the cops off or the agents off. And so you never really know exactly, but you just have to go to the sources of each of these stories and work it back from there. So I'm going to tell you these different stories, and you let me know what you think happened here. The story is he made his bones by killing this Jimmy McBratney and got the respect of Carlo Gambino, which, is mob lore now. Now, in the early 1970s, there was a series of kidnappings of New York City wise guys, and there's a book out there called Tough Guy, The True Story of Crazy Eddie Maloney. Now, in this book, Maloney discusses in detail some of these kidnappings that he and his gang were involved with, and Jimmy McBratney was part of this gang. The two men had met when they were incarcerated at Greenhaven State Prison in New York, and they became close friends. Maloney in the book describes McBratney as a devoted family man who stood 6'3", weighed 250 pounds, who was a weightlifter, and he claimed that McBratney could bench press 400 pounds. Maloney said that Jimmy McBratney was locked up for armed robbery, said he was quiet, a listener, and a learner. Pretty soon they were talking about doing things together whenever they got out. He also said that the guy knew a lot about guns, wanted to collect guns. Really, his heart was in his home life, his family life. He wasn't a guy that went out and played around. He loved his wife and two children. They had a house on Staten Island, and he wanted to save up enough to own a nightclub. And he said that actually McBratney was kind of prudish. That whenever the talk in the yard and at the prison was about women in a sexual manner, it upset him. Said his wife visited him regularly and wrote a letter every day. So he was a real family man. Now, after they were both released in October 1972, Maloney and Bratney became part of a kidnapping ring that they said, now Maloney claims was a brainchild of two other brothers who were wise guys from the Gambino crime family, Filippo and Ronnie Miano. They only wanted 10% of the ransoms, and Filippo told Maloney that his real motive for these kidnappings was revenge. He said, the guys I'm setting you up fucked me around and my people around on many business deals in the past, and I want to see those greedy fucks suffer. That sounds like something somebody like that would say. I mean, he's got the lingo down right, doesn't he? They were convinced that these kidnappings, mobsters could be pulled off without the victim's family or anybody notifying the cops. They believed they could get as much as $100,000 for each wise guy they snatched. Now, it's pretty dangerous snatching wise guys in New York City, but, they're not going to the cops, but they're going to send out their own little detectives. They knew if they did get caught, the punishment would be probably torture, maybe more than just a bullet in the head, probably torture, and then the bullet in the head. And now their little kidnapping gang was Maloney and McBratney, a guy named Tommy Genovese, who was a distant relative of Vito Genovese, a guy named Warren Chief Sherman, and Richie Chasen. They'd get home addresses from these Miano brothers, and they had a two-team approach. Now, this is all Maloney reporting this in his book. The first team would pretend to be police officers and use stolen badges and kidnap the wise guy from his home and then hold him in another location. The second team would then make the arrangements and pick up the ransom money. Now, the first kidnapping was of a Gambino capo named Frankie the Wop. Now, that escapade went off without a hitch, and the gang got away with $150,000. Over the next couple of months, they did 3 more successful kidnappings. They were going along pretty good. The next one after that, their luck changed. Now, McBratney actually planned this one, and they were going to grab a Gambino loan shark. They'd gotten a name and address from the Miano brothers, and they only knew him as Junior. They didn't know any other name on him. At least Maloney didn't know any other name on him. So they went by Junior's house. They found him stuck a gun in his stomach, put him in a car. When he got in the car, the victim put up a fight, and Maloney hit him over the head a couple of times and then shoved him in the back seat. There's a couple of kids that saw that scuffle around the car and followed them for a little bit. and got the license number and turned it over to one of the kid's uncles who happened to have some mob connections. So now this is in Gambino territory, and they've lost a guy, and now they've got the license number of the car that was used. They traced the car to a friend of Maloney's. That's where they were holding Junior in. This Junior. Now the Gambino guys, acted just like cops. They went to once they found out who'd done it, they went to the guy's mother, started asking questions about what was going on and where he might be. When they found out about this, McBratney went into a panic, and he realized that they probably had his name as well as Maloney's and this Sherman's. They got $21,000 for Junior, and they were going to return the victim. Well, Sherman was supposed to tape Junior's eyes over before covering those sunglasses. Well, he didn't get it done right. Maloney claims that after driving a few blocks, McBratney became enraged because he realized Junior's eyes weren't taped over very good. Jammed on the brakes. Junior jumped out of the back seat. He knew the shit was about to hit the fan. He jumped out of the back seat, started running for his life. McBratney jumped out and started shooting at him. This Sherman jumped out of the car and retreated to another car, to Maloney's car, who had been following along, and they were going to take off. Sherman was pretty sure that McBratney would kill him if he ever saw him again for chickening out like that, and Maloney, in his book, readily confirmed that fact. Maloney never would identify this Junior as Carlo Gambino's nephew or say this was that same one. But after this kidnapping, Maloney and his little gang got together, except for Sherman, and Maloney said that he told McBratney that he ought to leave town. McBratney declined to leave town. He said, "I'm just going to keep a machine gun in my car all the time." Well, about this time, Maloney was sent back to prison on a parole violation, and he was actually at a bar one night during this time, and he saw two guys talking to the bartender who were actually looking for him. The bartender knew him and played dumb, and he would later identify these two guys, or what he described as stone killers, as John Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero, that were looking for him. Maloney also stated in his book about McBratney, he said, after he heard he'd been killed, he said, "McBratney's death saddened me as nothing else in my life ever had. And he's been a good friend. He wasn't a hardened hoodlum like some of us. He always intended to get out of the life, and I believe he would have as soon as he got his nest egged by that bar. Also felt bad for Jimmy's wife. She'd been as loyal to him as he was to her. On a personal level, Jimmy would have risked his life for me and I for him, and a person doesn't make friends like that very often." He did confess in his book that in an effort to get a pass from the underworld for his own kidnapping capers, because he'd kidnapped some other made guys, he laid the weight of everything on McBratney. He sent word out that it was McBratney did this, McBratney did that. It didn't matter to Jimmy anymore because he was dead. In his book, Maloney never mentions the kidnapping and killing of Manny Gambino. So now what really happened to Manny Gambino? There's a totally different story out there, and it's based on a couple of good sources, depending on whether you believe an FBI agent or not, who may have been a little bit shady. I don't think he was, not as shady as the guy that came along behind him, DeVecchio. But in the book, Rick Agent, former agent Anthony Villano talked in detail about this kidnapping. He claimed he was tipped off that Manny Gambino, the son of Carlo's brother Joseph, had been kidnapped. And possibly and probably his source on this was the infamous FBI informant Greg Scarpa, because he had first talked to Villano before DeVecchio actually revived him as an informant. If you want to learn more about that, go back to my show on DeVecchio and Scarpa. Villano claimed that the first attempt by the family to deliver a ransom payment after Manny Gambino had been kidnapped failed because they went to the wrong restaurant to make the drop. Villano claims that during this time he tried to help the family, and at first they didn't want anything to do with him, but later on he said that an attorney for the Gambino family called him up and asked him to get involved. Villano reported the kidnappers asked for $200,000, and the Gambino family claimed they could only come up with $50,000. Now, I figured that Joe Gambino's side of the family was probably the poor side, more than likely, or another thing is $200,000 in cash would raise a lot of attention from law enforcement just knowing that they had that money, so they claimed they only had $50,000. I got new ransom instructions, and Tommy Gambino, Manny's brother, was told where to drive to pick up the next set of instructions, kind of one of those TV things, go here, answer this payphone, you got 5 minutes to get there, there'll be instructions under the bench, some crap like that. Villano then inserted himself into it, along with a business partner. The guy wasn't a made guy, but he's a business partner of Tommy Gambino, and they took the money. And Bolano got on the floor of the car that was delivering the ransom. The first stop was a telephone booth, 82nd and Madison Avenue in Manhattan. From there, he got instructions to go across the George Washington Bridge into New Jersey and wait at a well-lit gas station on the Palisades Parkway next to a set of payphones. At the payphones, they called with instructions to drop the money over a metal railing about a mile down the road. Somebody's been watching TV here looking at old movies. A drop was made before the agents tailing Bolano could get in a position to see the drop. But they did pick up the license number of a van that was seen nearby. I had this happen myself on it was a ransom of an art object, and it picked up a license number of a little Volkswagen Bug prowling around the area, and they never did pick up the money. But then when we traced down that license, we found the guy that had stole this art object he was trying to ransom back. So they went back to the Gambino home, and they were disappointed when Manny was not returned by the promised hour. They'd paid the ransom, dumped it over the railing. They'd gotten away. The kidnappers had gotten away with the ransom money, but Manny was not to be seen, and he was not to be seen again. Bolano kept investigating. And then as he got into this, he found out even more. He found out that Manny had fallen in love with a blonde girl, and he wanted to leave his family for this girl, his Gomar. And she wouldn't have anything more to do with him unless he left his wife and went full-time with her. Well, he went to some older Gambino family members, and they said, man, you can't do that. You got to grow up, man. You got to forget that blonde. Well, in his circles, in those circles, it's okay to have a blonde mistress and go out on Friday night and go out the girls' wives on Saturday night, I think is the deal out of Goodfellas. But it's really bad form. You're not really trustworthy if you leave your wife for your girlfriend. And particularly if you're a nephew of Carlo Gambino, not good at all. Bolano also found out that Manny had some financial problems, and probably because he was trying to maintain two households. I knew a guy that did this once. He had a lot of money. But, there's guys out there, and maybe some of you guys listening there's guys out there that will maintain two complete separate households, one for their mistress, pay all the bills, give them spending money, and one for the family. He was really heavily involved in the Gambino family loan sharking operations, and he had a lot of money on the streets. Now, this story claims that one of the individuals who invested a lot of money in Manny to put on the streets was a gambler named Robert Center. Center had rented the van. If you remember, the van that picked up the ransom had been rented to a Robert Center. I don't know why they didn't put that all together before, but they didn't. Bolano then gets Center in, and he claims in his book, Brick Agent, it took 5 interviews with Center over a period of months until we finally reconstructed the entire venture. The snatch began as a hoax. Manny Gambino worked out the scenario with the debtor, Center, a friend of Center's, and 2 others. Midway through the plot, Gambino's accomplices began to have their doubts. They could see that if things went sour, Manny Gambino would give them up and either go to the law or go to some of his Cosa Nostra friends and, they give them up and lay the blame on them and say, I didn't have anything to do with it. They were kidnapping me, and they're going to end up with a bullet in their head. Robert Center ended this dispute in a Gambino's car with a bullet to the back of Manny's head. They found Manny Gambino's car at the Newark airport. And Bolano reports that they found him buried, and his body had already had rigor mortis set in before they buried him, and he was found buried in the sitting position like he'd been sitting in a car for a long time. This was at a dump that they used for bodies periodically around the Earl Naval Ammunition Depot. Robert Center was arrested and charged with the murder, and in June 1973, he pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. During this entire detailed account of the incident, the kidnapping of Manny Gambino, Jimmy McBratney's name was never mentioned at all. So was McBratney involved in the death of Manny Gambino? Organized crime expert, maybe some of you guys know, and he's very well thought of, Jerry Capecci. He said in his book, Mobster, McBratney was not part of the Gambino kidnap scheme. Though some people may have believed it, he was a large, ruddy man who belonged to another gang. That gang crossed many ethnic lines, and they had kidnapped a Staten Island loan shark, got $21,000, But some neighborhood kids saw that snatch and passed along a license plate number to neighborhood family members. So, see, that kind of goes back to that original story. McBratney was probably identified as a member of the kidnapping team of Manny Gambino only because he had done other kidnappings with these guys, these Irish guys, Maloney and them. The Gambinos believed that story, and they had him murdered based on that information. Now, McBratney was obviously not an innocent, law-abiding citizen. He'd done armed robberies and kidnappings and had illegal weapons and been popped for all those things. If his aim had been better, that last Staten Island loan shark that they kidnapped, would have been killed, but he didn't kill him, and then the guy didn't really rat him out for that. But he sure as heck did not kidnap and murder the nephew of Carlo Gambino. This fabled notion that Gotti won the favor of the almighty Carlo Gambino by taking vengeance on the hood that killed his nephew is just one more piece of mob lore, but, it sounds pretty good, and Gotti probably went along with it. It was easy to just say, yeah, he's the guy that did it. They didn't have to take it to court and prove it in court. But let's look at the NYPD investigation into the identification of Gotti and Rosario as part of the team that murdered McBratney. Did that go wrong in some way? Now, the main detective on that was a detective, Raymond Taylor. He was a pretty well-known detective. He was in the Crimes Against Persons Squad, worked out of the 122nd Precinct on Staten Island. He responded to a homicide inside Snoopy's Bar on Castleton Avenue in the New Brighton section of 120th Precinct. Squad Commander Tom Quinn and other detectives responded. The uniformed cops had done a really good job of the crime scene and kept all the witnesses in there, anybody who hadn't got away right after the shooting went down, because usually everybody bails out of a bar, especially that kind of a bar. Whenever there's a shooting, a fight, or anything, nobody wants to get involved with that shit. When Taylor and the other homicide squad guys got there, they saw the victim was lying face up on the barroom floor. He had gunshot wounds to his head. As the witnesses were separated and interviewed, they examined the body and found out who the guy was. They found a car registration and some keys to a car. They went outside, found the car, and guess what? They found a machine gun in the trunk of the car. I knew right then this wasn't your garden variety, just a argument turned into a homicide. And reconstructed the crime, and Raymond Taylor is a really well-known detective and a good detective. And he knew a lot of the organized crime families in New York and knew this was probably a mob hit. They started questioning of other witnesses, and that indicated it was an organized crime hit, just the way the guys three men had entered the bar and pretended to be police officers and tried to take him in custody, which is a really common thing that these mob guys do is flash a badge on somebody and get them under their control, get them outside, get them in a car, get them in a quiet place. So remember that, guys. Somebody will flash a badge on you. Don't let them take you anywhere until you're sure they are who they say they are. He resisted because he was a big man, and he resisted, and they just went and popped him in the head several times right there. By then, they identified the victim was a hoodlum named James McBratney. And they claimed there was somebody told them that he was one of the guys responsible for kidnapping the nephew of Carlo Gambino and had gotten a $100,000 ransom. Now, that word was out there on the streets, and the Gambinos wanted to believe it. Now, the witnesses in the bar, they wouldn't identify any of the three men that came in. They canvassed the neighborhood. But like many cases, a break came from an information provided by just a patrol cop from the neighborhood. Raymond Taylor got a call from a street policeman. He said he had got a tip on the murder in Staten Island, and he came up with some names. And Taylor brought the mugshots of Gotti, Angelo Rosario, and a guy named Ralph Gallione, or Ralphie Wiggs. And the informant that the cop had set him up with identified them as those were the guys that did it. And he said that they had presented fake police badges. He even described the scene that Angelo was on the left, Galliano was on the right, and John Gotti was behind him. Said Galliano had a gun, Angelo Rosario had a pair of handcuffs. And as they began pulling McBratney up and away from the bar, and they said, "You're under arrest. You've been this route before. Don't give us any trouble." Another patron tried to intervene, and Galliano fired a couple of shots. McBratney really started struggling then, and then Galliano fired 3 times at close range, killing McBratney. So Gotti didn't even kill him. Now, Gotti Gotti, I think, was kind of in charge of this little hit team, but he isn't the one that actually dropped the hammer on him. They arrested Ralphie Wiggs right away. And the second suspect, Angelo Rosario, was arrested in his bed at gunpoint. You make those early morning raids, catch these guys while they're still in bed. John Gotti heard that this was happening. He went on the lam. After they were arraigned in court, they got out on bail. Right after that, Ralphie Wiggs is killed. I think maybe they didn't trust him to hold the water. I got a feeling. I had a wanted card out describing John Gotti and, with his name and everything, and all the law enforcement agents had it. And the FBI learned that where Gotti was and notified the NYPD. So they all got together in a little team of FBI agents and Raymond Taylor and went to where they knew Gotti was going to be. Well, they arrested him, and Gotti knew Raymond Taylor, and they said, "Hey, Taylor, what's this shit?" The FBI took Gotti to federal court first, because they had like a warrant on him for fleeing the jurisdiction. And then they gave him to Detective Taylor in the NYPD. Then he ended up facing state charges in the Staten Island Criminal Court. Gotti and Ruggiero hired Roy Cohen, and he got him a pretty sweet deal. They only served a few years on it. This arrest was unique because it was the Teflon Don's first official hit, first official anything here that anybody really knows much about him other than some kid stuff. Milano was using Gregory Scarpa, and he probably had other good informants, and he was really involved in trying to get the people who got away with the money, and that whole story about Manny Gambino wanting to run away with his mistress and needing money and get out of the family. It just, I don't know. It's kind of far-fetched, but on one hand, but on the other hand, it kind of rings true. And then Jerry Capiche, a guy that you can trust, claimed that McBratney had nothing to do with the Gambino kidnapping, and McBratney was involved in kidnapping other gangsters for ransom at that time. So that's the story. It's a little bit confusing, a little bit complicated. I hope I was able to make sense of it for you guys. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot, guys.